Hey everyone, how's it going? Geek here, and today we're doing a very special episode. This will be my first viewer requested tutorial for the channel, and I'm pretty excited for it. If you watched my last video, I'll drop a link to it right here if you didn't. I talked at length about wanting to help developers by covering tutorials that don't get enough coverage online. So when someone reached out through the comments and told me they were having trouble figuring out a melee combat system, I knew I just had to help. So throughout the next few videos, I'll be covering the steps to create a pretty basic melee combat system in Unreal Engine. I'm hoping that by the end of this tutorial series, anyone following will have a decent understanding of what goes into a combat system so that they can implement these concepts into their own projects. I'll be approaching these tutorials as though anyone watching is an absolute beginner to Unreal Engine, meaning any step taken will be explained if necessary to make sure no one is left behind or confused on how we achieve the final results. So let's jump right into the first episode of my Melee Combat tutorial series, discussing everything you'll need to get started with a combat system and specifically covering your animations. So, to get started with melee combat for any game project, you'll need a few things. Specifically animation assets, an animation montage, weapon models if you're doing weapon-based combat, some hit detection, health and damage calculations, and some blueprint logic to tie it all together. Listing it out probably makes it sound like a ton of work, but trust me, it's actually a pretty simple process once you break it down. The hardest part about any of this is actually the planning process. I highly recommend, and I can't stress this enough, that you fully plan out the exact style you're going for with your combat system. Too often do a lot of newbie game developers jump into a project before they have all the details planned out. A lot of people, even Unreal Engine vets who have been doing game development for years, just think to themselves, add a combat system and start working, which is never a good idea. Being ambitious and eager to start your project is absolutely fine, but failure to plan out your project can lead to major issues. If you decide halfway through the fighting style represented in your animation assets doesn't fit your project, you just lost hours of work because now you need to start over and redo all your animations and animation blueprints. So the main takeaway of this video to get started with a combat system is to fully plan it out before you do any work on your project. The best way to do that is to ask yourself these two questions. What fighting style are you wanting represented in your game? You need to think about what type of style or styles would best fit with the overall lore of your project. And does your combat system flow well with your gameplay? After ironing out the fighting styles you'll use, make sure the combat doesn't interrupt the gameplay in a dramatic way. For example, having a Mortal Kombat style combat system wouldn't flow well in an open world RPG because the gameplay styles are just too different. Okay, now that we've covered the basics for getting started with combat mechanics and you've hopefully planned out what you want implemented in your game, let's talk animation. Specifically, we'll be talking about what animation assets you'll need and how you can get them. When it comes to animation, there are a few options for you to use depending on your skill set. The best options I'd recommend you explore would be custom animations, Mixamo animations, or Unreal Engine Marketplace animations. All three are good options depending on your needs, so take the time to decide which option you'd prefer to use. If you know how to do animations with 3D modeling software or have the time to learn, I'd strongly recommend creating custom animation assets so you have complete creative control over every movement. If this isn't possible for you though, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using pre-done assets from either Mixamo or the Marketplace. If you plan on using Mixamo, be aware that you'll have to retarget your animations to the Unreal Engine skeleton to have them work properly, which I can touch on in the next tutorial episode if anyone needs me to. So now that we've established where you can get your animations, let's cover what specific animations you'll need for a combat system. Starting off, you'll need an idle animation. For those new to game development, this is the animation asset to represent a character with no current player input. The character will always return to this animation state whenever the player stops moving, so it's important to keep it dynamic and interesting for when the player sees it, because they'll end up seeing it more often than you think. For a game centered around combat, the character should be in a battle-ready position during their idle animation. For those not creating their own assets, look for animations where the character is squaring their shoulders, they have a subtle rhythm in their body movement, or they have a consistent bending of the knees. These are all features you typically see in animations from mainstream examples of this kind of game, so look for any fighting game like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter for reference. Next, you'll need your attack animations. This is where things get tricky because you really need to focus on making sure your animations flow together nicely. Later on in this series, we'll be setting up something called an animation montage, an asset that lets us properly cycle through attack animations, so it's important that our animations don't have noticeable gaps in between each one. I highly suggest you find a complete pack of attack animations for those not creating their own on either Mixamo or through the Marketplace so that you know they'll flow together nicely. There are a ton of good animation packs available online, some with exceptional quality, so browse around to find animations that are right for you. I'd recommend finding animation packs with some variety in the attacks, mixing some light and heavy attacks, so you can incorporate these aspects to make your combat more appealing from a gameplay perspective. Finally, you can grab a death animation or two. Now, some people prefer to use good old-fashioned ragdoll physics for character deaths. If you're one of those people, no problem. Unreal Engine has the ability to simulate physics built into it, so you can skip having to find a flashy death animation. If you don't like the look of your characters falling to the ground like random piles of dead weight, then absolutely take the time to find a nice death animation. There are a ton of options to choose from. You have some serious deaths, some really drawn out deaths, some goofy deaths, and even some rather weird ones. So really go for whatever you feel best fits your game. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about this one matching our other animations seamlessly, so you have a bit more freedom to find an animation that you absolutely love. And with that, we've reached the end of the first episode of my Melee Combat tutorial series. Sorry that this video was very information heavy, but like I said, I'm treating this series as though the viewer is a potential noob to game development. I didn't want to jump ahead and assume everyone watching had everything planned out, all their animations ready, and had a decent understanding of Unreal Engine, because that's likely not often going to be the case. We had to start from the beginning and outline everything you'll need so that the people watching are fully prepared and know what to expect moving forward. In the next video, we'll be importing all of our animations over to Unreal Engine, demonstrating Mixamo retargeting for anyone who needs it, and then creating our animation montage to cycle through attack animations. We'll be jumping straight into Unreal Engine, so take the time now to find animation assets that you'll want to use. Also, to everyone watching that's currently developing a game, plan your shit out. That's the one takeaway I want everyone to remember from this video. I honestly can't stress this enough. The last thing you want is to finish a combat system after this tutorial series and fully implement it into your game, only to realize it doesn't flow well with your project and you literally wasted hours of development time on it. So plan while you're gathering all your animations for the next video. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Guys, it would really help out my channel if you did. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. There's gonna be a lot more Melee Combat tutorials coming, and you don't want to miss an upload and fall behind. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you guys next time.